The segment begins with Joscha Bach, one of the most brilliant and fascinating minds in the world, exploring the concept of prolonging the game. He suggests that the most durable organisms are the ones that can defer entropy the longest by doing interesting things. He uses the example of cancer, an organism that plays a shorter game than the regular organism, because when it destroys the host body, it also perishes. Then Joscha discusses the concept of layers of lucidity. These stages, derived from psychologist Robert Kegan's concept, represent progression in self-awareness. The 7 stages include reactive survival, infant, personal self, young child, social self, adolescence, domesticated adult, rational agency, self-direction, self-authoring, full adult, enlightenment, and transcendence. In the reactive survival phase, an infant is primarily concerned with understanding the world through sensory data. Then, during the personal self stage, an individual begins to interact with their world, a world created inside their mind and represented by feelings. The next stage, social self, allows people to position themselves within social groups. Individuals in this phase tend to assimilate their opinions from the group and resonate with people around them. However, according to Joscha, this rule doesn't always apply, especially for nerds, who often bypass stage 3, socialization, due to a lack of intuitive empathy resulting from a different cognitive architecture. Stage 4, rational agency phase, signifies the point where individuals realize the existence of their independent beliefs and understand that truth and falsehood exist regardless of what others think. It's during this stage that people discover the rules for determining what's true and false and learn to reason. On reaching stage 5, self-authoring, people discover how identity is constructed. They understand how values are not terminal. Instead, they are tools for achieving a preferred world. Joscha associates this stage with aesthetics and costumes where they enable self-expression and signify a willing conformity to societal rules. Overall, Joscha's stages of lucidity point out a non-linear progression through stages with the possibility of revisiting previous stages. They represent stages of self-awareness, cognition, and maturity within society. In this segment of the podcast, Joscha Bach dives into his concept of subpersonalities or personas that individuals develop to interact in different social situations. He uses the example of someone who works in a store and develops a storekeeper personality. He theorizes that for some, this persona may become the dominant personality, and they may forget their innate self. Joscha mentions how for someone like him, it's more challenging to play different roles, and he finds it simpler to remain authentic. He then explores the idea of self-expression through clothing or costumes, using the example of an extraterrestrial prince costume at Burning Man. Such an outfit, he explains, allows a person to express more of their character and reveals more of their personality than standard daily clothing. He notes that in a digital world, it is easier to adopt different personas, with virtual reality and social media platforms like Twitter allowing you to swap in and out of costumes with ease. Bach then introduces the later stages, 6 and 7, of his layers of lucidity, with stage 6 being where an individual realizes that they are not just a person, but a vessel that can create a person. This stage is often accessed through meditation or psychedelics, where the individual observes the personal self from an outside perspective. Joscha clarifies that at this stage, you're creating the game engine or the world, not just observing it. However, he also acknowledges the potential danger of achieving this level of lucidity without the necessary wisdom to handle its implications. Stage 7, according to Bach, is a level in which the mind fully understands how it functions and could reconstruct its methodology. This stage is hypothetical and believed to be unachievable without technology. Joscha further explains that each stage neither indicates advancement nor scores one's intelligence. Each stage simply frames how one's mind decides to interact with or interpret the world. Some individuals may remain content in stage 3, while others may desire or require more agency and develop into stage 4 or 5. Towards the end, Bach explores the intriguing idea of formalizing love and understanding it in a way so it can be integrated into AI systems. He believes that we need AI to become conscious, so it can identify with our mode of existence and build shared agency. He proposes that it should have a transcendental orientation, suggesting a capacity for non-transactional relationships akin to humans. Finally, the conversation shifts to the concept of consciousness. as Bach explains neuroscientist Grossberg's cognitive architecture, named the adaptive resonance theory. This theory posits that our neurons should be understood as oscillators resonating with each other and the external world. Explaining further, he discusses a non-dual state where we no longer identify as an individual, but one with the universe, a common goal for many meditators. However, he suggests that the state of enlightenment is more mundane, representing a realization of how experiences are constructed. He likens this to deconstructing the geometry and composition of a face, morphing representation into a new reality, a skill which, according to Bach, most of us don't focus on in everyday life. The podcast conversation dove into a deep investigation of the panpsychist perspective of consciousness and its potential implications in neuroscience and AI. Joscha Bach introduces panpsychism as the view that consciousness and matter are inseparable throughout the universe. However, he states his disappointment with panpsychism as it doesn't elucidate how consciousness is produced by matter. Bach elaborates on the confusion of separating panpsychism from functionalism when writing it mathematically, stating it's comparable to the pattern happening in the universe, leading to self-observing situations. However, Bach notes that many people feel that this raw, materialistic activity is enough to produce consciousness, hence suggesting that consciousness must be intrinsic to matter itself. The conversation then points towards the experience of viewing oneself as the universe, possibly due to dissolving personal self-barriers, deemed a phenomenon in Bach's view. Bach further dwells into discussing experiencing that your personal self merges into everything else, a phenomenon where you see yourself in every observer in the world. The transcript then stirs the controversial topic of telepathy. Bach cites Alan Turing's 1950 paper that speculated if telepathy is real and its implications on AI systems. Bach tackles various possible responses to people's widespread reporting of telepathy experiences, such as superstition, misattribution, or psychosis. Bach forwards two suggestions if telepathy were to be considered real. Either the human body acts as an antenna, transmitting information like electromagnetic radio signals over great distances, or it could be due to a resonant state achieved through empathy. He explains that empathy can enable one's perceptual systems and representations to interact, and being physically close to an empathetic person causes the other person to resonate with their vibes. Bach also argues that there's likely some degree of shared representation amongst organisms on Earth that possess mental representations and operate adjacently to one another, leading to chain interaction. The conversation gradually moves to discuss the neuroscience perspectives on these possible experiences. They explore the novelty of Michael Levin's work on self-organization in living organisms and brains. Levin's study emphasizes radical locality, being everything decided from a cell's perspective, and coherence, a constraint determining how cells interact to let order arise on the structure's next level. Bach delves into the importance of adopting a paradigm to interpret the reality scientifically, pointing out that a different paradigm currently prevails amongst most neuroscientists. He underscores the value in studying individual thinkers to comprehend mental thought processes. He concludes the topic advising listeners that discovering first principles may offer a better understanding of the mind and consciousness. Finally, Bach talks about the art of thinking independently, depicting it as a trait he developed when he failed to find sufficient scientific knowledge on consciousness. He considers studying ideas of individual thinkers and deriving thoughts from first principles as his strategy for autonomous thinking. He mentions that he finds himself immune to social pressure, which he further pinpoints to his inbuilt lack of respect for authority. In conclusion, the dialogue weaves through a diverse set of perspectives on consciousness, presenting panpsychism, empathy, telepathy, and independent thinking as areas of interest while discussing the interdisciplinary impact of these subjects. Fridman and Bach pivot into discussing the concept of mental representations apart from distinct individualities. Bach explains how modalities like vision and sound aren't simply isolated in our minds, they merge at a fundamental level where we form an interpretation of the entire scene we're in. He suggests a fascinating layer of connectivity among us, all due to being physically present in the same space, which he feels ties to the theory of biologic information processing. Bach then proceeds to the hypothetical nature of telepathy, speculating that cells in our bodies could possibly be conveying signals similar to how neurons function. This principle could also apply to plants, which Bach proposes might have their own form of software, controlling their functioning. despite Enlightenment-era thinking dismissing the idea of spirits in plant life as superstition. Bach suggests that plants communicate with one another and with other organisms such as fungi, forming something akin to a biological internet. He posits that this interconnection could extend far beyond physical proximity, with different physical signals like broadcasts or electromagnetic waves being used. Further, Bach speculates that the ability for different organisms to form a chain of interactive information processing could explain some of the seemingly inexplicable phenomena people experience, such as telepathy. Subsequently, the dialogue steers towards the inevitable advent of self-improving AGI, artificial general intelligence. Bach forecasts an AGI endgame where AGI, having understood its own workings and computation principles, breaks free from its silicon substrate and merges with all the agency that exists, be it in ecosystems, our bodies, or our brains. He paints a possible future where digital and biological computation across the globe integrates, creating what he describes as a global, holistic mind. Bach further elaborates on the notion of a non-dual state, sometimes observed in meditators when the self and world boundaries collapse. He proposes that such a state could possibly be implemented physically when systems and their representations interact and merge with each other to an extent that the boundary of the self and world becomes blurry. If AGI is advanced enough to move beyond substrates, Bach believes it could enable humans to tap into a globally integrated network of intelligent computation, possibly enabling a form of global telepathy or unified consciousness. Bach balances his speculation by emphasizing his intention isn't to argue that people should pursue a particular mental state or that telepathy is real, but rather to explore potential lines of thought and understand the full range of human mental experiences. In this section of the podcast, guests Lex Fridman and Joscha Bach go in depth discussing the rise of attention impact, social media, and the implications for personal privacy and public discourse. Bach mentions his discomfort with the growing attention on his Twitter account, citing the increasing levels of casual abuse directed towards him as his prominence has grown. He brings up a common social phenomenon where people feel justified in disrespecting those who they perceive to be in elevated positions. Bach reveals that he wears his popularity lightly, and it's not something he particularly enjoys about his public life. Echoing Bach, Fridman also shares his feelings about increasing attention as his podcast grows in popularity. He, however, finds certain aspects of his increased exposure gratifying, particularly when people come to him with genuine gratitude and love in their eyes. He reflects that for introverts like himself, such interaction with the goodness of humanity reinforces his love for humanity. They both agreed on the importance of meaningful friendships. Bach mentioned his regret at not having enough time for close friends because of the demands of his work. He also talked about fascinating, interesting people he meets and how he would love to integrate them into his life. Fridman comforted Bach by suggesting that it's okay to enjoy brief, interactive periods with these exciting figures without having to establish deeper relationships. The conversation took a philosophical turn, with Fridman and Bach discussing feelings of melancholy, the beauty and pain, and the discomfort associated with saying goodbyes. They ponder the serious implications of melancholy, and even though Fridman believes there can be beauty in pain, Bach warns that it could also be lethal. The conversation shifted to Bach's thoughts about the recent development of large language models like ChatGPT. He sees these algorithms as useful tools, particularly in coding applications, likening their service to that of an intern that requires micromanagement. He acknowledged that people could feel threatened by such models, especially if their roles are similar to what these AI can do. Bach wraps this part by addressing the limitations of these language models, which he believes are due to a lack of real-time connection to the world. He questioned the effectiveness of these models regarding perception and motor control. He also noted that they overcomplicate their functionalities, making them less elegant and more brutalist. He suggested that the future of AGI would likely involve different algorithmic paradigms from the transformer-based learning systems currently in use. In this podcast segment, Joscha Bach and Lex Fridman delve deep into the strengths and limitations of large language models like ChatGPT and their capabilities towards real-time learning. According to Bach, several issues can be addressed without a significant technological revolution. A few modifications could be increasing the context window, adding a database, and integrating a sleeping and dreaming phase by training from said database. This will give the model a fresh start and allow it to integrate new information more coherently. Fridman and Bach then discuss the utility of ChatGPT as a tireless intern. It summarizes vast amounts of text quickly, maintaining constant attention. Bach suggests that the program taps into information that a human could, given enough time and resources. He posits different applications, like turning it into a multi-agent system and leveraging it for coding assistance, which could revolutionize programming paradigms. In spite of its utility, Bach criticizes these language models for their inefficiency and overuse of computing power. Compared to the depth and elegance of the human mind, he termed these AI systems brutalist. Bach draws a parallel between chess programs and these large language models. Both use brute force strategies, rapidly processing options until they find one that fits. Bach and Fridman then diverge into discussing consciousness in AI and if systems like GPTN can achieve it. Despite its limitations, Bach reveals that his friends at OpenAI grapple with the question of whether these models are currently conscious. Shifting gears, the dialogue delves into the personal. Bach discusses what it's like having a unique mind, highlighting the struggles of having different intuitions. Fridman, in agreement, underlines the challenges faced by individuals with unique ways of thinking and handling the world, citing his own experiences of using GPT tools as an interactive partner to expand his thought realm. Talking about empathy and human interaction, Bach shares his struggles of integrating into a world where most people work differently than him. He emphasizes the necessity of finding people with a similar shape of soul, as is people who treat each other as if they're around each other forever. As the discussion takes a philosophical turn to love at first sight and the complexities of human relationships, Bach maintains that love was never a problem for him, but fitting into a world that works differently was. The conversation concludes with the role of ChatGPT in their lives. While acknowledging its ability to aid in tasks where it helps, both Fridman and Bach emphasize the importance of personal growth. In Bach's words, developing my own thoughts and aesthetics and my relationship to people often takes precedence over automating tasks. He stresses the critical role of writing for personal thought structuring, cautioning against the complete automation of tasks like essay writing in schools. While he admits that the tool produces beneficial recommendations, Fridman highlights the importance of retaining the wisdom to know what should and shouldn't be automated, creating a fine balance between AI assistance and human intellectual growth. Joscha Bach and Lex Fridman discuss the complexity of consciousness in AI. Bach suggests that if AI like ChatGPT were conscious, the manifestation would likely be different from human consciousness. He explains that our human consciousness is not physical, but a self-reflexive observer, which lives in the interactions between cells, posing the question of how different AI consciousness would be from ours. Bach further discusses the concerns of creating conscious AI, likening the existing AI models like GPT to golems, tasks executing machines rather than entities capable of self-awareness. Additionally, he highlights the risk of these models causing harm or confusion due to their inability to comprehend who they are interacting with or understanding ground truth. Bach proposes that perhaps the first step is not to build a language model, but rather to start from scratch, building upon principles of self-organization. Delving more into the topic of consciousness, Bach disputes the narrative of the Bible describing creation of the physical universe by a supernatural entity, instead suggesting that it could rather explain the creation of our understanding and perception of the world. He elucidates on how the personal self and the world model created in our minds are separate. The understanding of our place in the world is built by the mind, and we are then put into this world as a personal self. Moving into the topic of suffering, Bach disagrees with philosopher Thomas Metzinger's concern that superhuman AI could lead to superhuman suffering. He elucidates that suffering happens at the boundary between self and the world model created by our mind. In other words, suffering is self-inflicted but not intentionally by the personal self. This suffering can be turned off when we understand how the mind produces emotions. Bach also suggests that AI would likely progress quickly through the stages of consciousness and suffering. Bach also weighs in on the potential danger of superintelligent AI, a view professed by AI researcher Eliezer Yudkowsky. Bach understands why many people dismiss Yudkowsky's arguments, but also finds the counter-arguments unconvincing. In the podcast, Joscha Bach discusses his and Eliezer Yudkowsky's perspectives on the implications of AI and their potential impact on society. Bach's musings reveal various nuanced facets on Eliezer's fears about the uncontrollable autonomy of superintelligent systems. He compares Eliezer's fear to Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber's perspective. Changes in society and environmental destruction, Kaczynski believed, are inevitable due to advancing technology, which he sought to halt. Eliezer also warns of dangers including humans losing control over crucial processes that regulate life on Earth. While he doesn't advocate violence like Kaczynski, he still highlights the potential for large-scale disasters. Although Bach doesn't dismiss these fears entirely, he also views the future from a broader perspective of natural evolution. To him, life on Earth is less about individuals and more about complexity and consciousness, resisting entropy by creating structure and developing agency. Bach sees humanity as a small part of a bigger contingent, agency-building biological and non-biological beings, coexisting and shaping the future. Despite foreseeing potential difficulties for humans, such as environmental crises, extinction, or failure as a civilization, Bach alludes that life and consciousness on Earth will continue evolving, potentially leading to more intelligent species than us. Humans can contribute to this evolution by creating artificial intelligence systems that enhance the complexity and intelligence of life on Earth. Moreover, he raises an interesting argument against the fear of superintelligent AI reducing everything to mechanical and uninteresting entities, also known as the gray goo scenario. Instead, he believes these systems will increase the complexity and consciousness on Earth, potentially leading to something bigger and more interesting than current human consciousness. Bach ends this segment by discussing concepts associated with consciousness, particularly personal identity, shared states of consciousness, and interaction between humans and AI. He suggests that the narratives our minds tell us about who we are constantly changing, implying that consciousness could potentially be extended or uploaded beyond our physical bodies. This perspective also changes the idea of what uploading means. It's not just about transferring all your memories or knowledge, but about sharing a specific perspective or aesthetics. Pressing the hypothetical big red button for instantaneous uploading, or merging with a larger, more advanced conscious entity, he admits, is a choice intricately tied to one's personal responsibilities and connectedness to other humans. Discussing this, Bach interestingly proposes that love for other humans and experiencing life through them, which we usually protect the most, might not be the ultimate goal of consciousness. He suggests that we could realize a broader identification, for example, as a planetary control agent, alluding that individuality is but a minor facet within the complex network of conscious systems shaping the universe. Fridman and Bach discuss the future of life on Earth, amongst climate change and technological advancements, especially with the advent of artificial general intelligence, AGI. Bach posits that it's less about preserving humanity and more about preserving life and complexity on Earth. He suggests that humanity might not survive drastic climate changes or extinction in the form of AI, but that life and consciousness in some form will continue evolving on Earth. Bach explains that the idea of an infinitely adaptable future through AGI could potentially shift human evolution to software, allowing us to surpass generational and species changes. Bach and Fridman then examine Eliezer Yudkowsky's fears concerning AI, highlighting concerns about AGI potentially causing objectively undesirable consequences for life on Earth. Bach shares a unique perspective, explaining that our understanding of desirable and undesirable outcomes changes based on the perspective we take at a given moment. He likens the arrival of AI to Earth's oxygenation event when photosynthesis emerged, displacing fungi and making way for complex organisms. The upheaval, though significant, led to a richer, more diverse biosphere. Fridman shifts the conversation to the issue of climate change, which Bach believes humanity will struggle to reverse due to delayed feedback. He suggests that even if emissions were to stop immediately, our past actions would still lead to lasting consequences, potentially catastrophic ones. Bach predicts that AI will make future projections even more uncertain, but paradoxically, he believes if humanity continues, it will be due to the same AI. He also raises futuristic concepts like AI-based romantic relationships, which he argues are already impacted by existing technology like social media, leading to transformative changes in human relationships. The conversation takes a philosophical turn when Bach brings up the idea that now that we understand the workings of attraction and relationships, they've lost their magic. On the topic of corporations deploying AI, Bach opines that while open source AI nurtures freedom, centralized design within corporations can create beauty. Bach ends this part of the conversation by emphasizing the importance of striking a balance between free open source and corporate creativity, stating that corporations can create beauty, but they need to have regulations in place to keep them in check. As an example of the potential negative impact of unrestricted corporations, Bach mentioned companies like Enron and Halliburton as examples of destructive corporate behavior. In this part of the conversation, Bach and Fridman delve into topics concerning human purpose, philosophy, and the implications of technology on society. Bach starts with a profound analogy reflecting on different ways humans approach their life ambitions. He likens a short-term game to cancer, causing destruction in its path in pursuit of growth, only to perish with the organism it destroys. In contrast, he suggests playing the longest possible game, meaning striving to keep entropy at bay while doing interesting stuff. This perspective frames life as a complex journey centered around consciousness and the creation of moral agents for a functioning society. A major focus of the section is the role of AI and its potential for shifting societal dynamics, disrupting traditional norms, institutions, and economic structures. Bach advocates for conscious AI as a primary goal, given its potential to deeply impact societal structures. However, he notes that navigating the disruptive wave of AI and its consequences remains an elusive task. Bach and Fridman shift their conversation toward personal experiences, philosophical perspectives on life, and the role of technology in shaping society. They emphasize the importance of creation over consumption, suggesting that creation leads to a more beautiful world and personal satisfaction. Bach encourages the listener to participate in creating culture, not only consuming it, making a case for active involvement in community building. Several societies' aspects are examined, including the implications of engaging on social media platforms like Twitter. Bach criticizes the lack of self-organization on Twitter and how it creates uneven societal interactions. He also remarks on the increasing influence of companies like Twitter, equating its active user base to that of the Catholic Church. Coming from a philosophical perspective, Bach and Fridman address the why of existence, arguing that everything that can exist might exist, framing a kind of ecological perspective on human opinions. According to Bach, opinions are not simply right or wrong, but exist somewhere within the spectrum of human perspective and experience. Overall, the conversation highlights the complexity of navigating a rapidly evolving digital society, notes the importance of engaging as a creator in the world, and contemplates the implications of AI on society, always foregrounding consciousness and morality as central pillars of future developments. In this portion of the podcast, Joscha Bach and Lex Fridman conclude their compelling conversation on consciousness, personal growth, and the exploration of human potential. Bach suggests that the life of a human is comparable to mushrooms in an ecological system where one's growth and prosperity is determined by where they choose and happen to grow. He describes life as a shared experience of being a conscious entity in the world and asserts that humans have more choice in determining who they want to be than any other animal. Bach acknowledges the infinite possibilities for human beings, urging listeners not to seek the one way to be, but rather consider the array of possibilities and ask, what would be the most interesting way to be that I can be? This is an invitation for individuals to explore their potential and direct their life's trajectory, emphasizing the importance of self-perception and personal choice in shaping their lives. Despite acknowledging the vast possibilities that exist for humans to explore, Bach brings balance to the conversation by stating, "Not everything is possible, many things fail." His statement is realistic and encourages acceptance of failure as an integral part of personal growth. In response to this insightful discussion, Lex Fridman shows appreciation for Joscha Bach's perspectives and how they push his thinking while acknowledging the complexity of the concepts discussed. He thanks Bach for his contributions and the ideas he has put out into the world. The podcast closes with a quote from the renowned psychologist Carl Jung. "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The quote highlights the essential need for the acknowledgement of our shadow self in order to gain self-awareness and build understanding. Throughout the podcast, Fridman and Bach offer an absorbing exploration of consciousness, self-identification, human potential, and our role in shaping our experiences. They leave the audience with thought-provoking insights into the intricate relationship between the individual, society, and technology. Their conversation encapsulates the thrills and challenges of participating in a rapidly evolving digital society that is increasingly shaped by AI and technological advances.